I'm old enough to remember when CJ Abrams was your all-star shortstop, but as we sit here today, he has been in one of the worst slumps in his entire career. So, what has gone wrong?
You are Locked On Nationals, your daily Washington Nationals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thank you all for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcast. And of course, you can check us out over on Twitter at RyanClary11 and as well as our show page at LO_Nationals. For all your latest Nationals news and notes, make sure to check us out over on X. And of course, look up Locked On Nationals wherever you get your podcast, and that is including over on YouTube. Hit that subscriber button when you get there. Drop a comment, drop a thumbs up, whatever it is. You can find us wherever you get your podcast. Again, search Locked On Nationals. That is where you'll find us for your daily content on the Washington Nationals. Later on in today's show, we've got a Nats Marlins Game 2 previews. The Nationals did get Game 1 last night, and they improved to 8-0 against the Miami Marlins this season. They have dominated them. And if you remember last year, and really the last few years, really since the pandemic, the Marlins have dominated us. So it is finally nice to see us turning around against the Fish. Later on as well, you've got a Cade Cavalli update. He threw a bullpen here recently. And also, Keibert Ruiz has kind of turned it around. We'll discuss that in the second segment, as Spencer Nussbaum has written a very interesting piece on Keibert Ruiz. So we'll mention that in today's second segment. But we start off with what has happened with CJ Abrams. Before we get into it, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It is game time. So let's get into it here as CJ Abrams. What has happened to our all-star shortstop? I could not tell you a time over the last really 2 months where CJ Abrams has been a positive for this team. That is where we are at this point. I don't know what it is, but really, if you were to kind of just go back into the numbers and really look at how much he has struggled over his last 38 games, which is since the All-Star break, he is a completely different hitter. Completely different. CJ Abrams was your All-Star. He was the guy that we were talking about who would be the face of this franchise. Your All-Star shortstop. The big name. The guy that you will see people wearing jerseys all around Nationals Park, in the D.C. area, around Major League Baseball. You still see it today. But since the All-Star break, he has completely fallen off a hill. What has happened to him? I don't have an answer. I should have an answer, but I don't. But we do have the numbers here for you. Over his last 38 games, again, since the All-Star break, he is batting .178, a .239 OBP, a .274 slug, and a .513 OPS. Also in that time frame, he only has 8 extra base hits in those 38 games. He's got 37 strikeouts, which is relatively up from what we're used to seeing, and only 8 walks as well. Looking deeper at the numbers, though, I think one thing that we do kind of have to consider with CJ Abrams, and this is just the reality of it, CJ Abrams isn't necessarily a finished product. The 23-year-old shortstop has all the talent in the world, and we all know that. We know that CJ can be that franchise shortstop, and in fact, I know for a fact that he is going to be that. But through these trials and tribulations of 2024, the first half of the season treated him much better, where, again, he was a legit, real all-star for your Nationals. There was discussion of him being one of the better shortstops in the National League over the first half of this season. But in the second half, it has fallen off completely. If you were to look at Baseball Savant, which I do pretty regularly, you would probably notice a huge dip off in his numbers. In all of his batting categories, expected OBP, expected slugging, hard hit percentage, exit velocity. If you were to look at those in the first half of the season, he was pretty much well above average in almost all of those categories. Now he sits below average. This slump that has now been happening for nearly 2 months is a real thing. We already gave you the numbers, but what I really pinpoint his offensive production, or the lack thereof, is his chase. And that is a common thing with a lot of Nationals hitters in 2024. You can go out of your way and say, well, it's Darnell Coles. Yeah, Darnell Coles is the hitting coach. Should he be here next year? No, but that's for a later discussion for a different day. But right now, his chase percentage is in the 8th percentile in Major League Baseball. He is chasing at a rate of which no shortstops in the National League are at this point. That is a real concern moving forward, in my opinion. The chase rate of CJ Abrams, and you've seen this time and time again, this has popped up throughout his last 3 years here in DC. You've seen him really struggle as far as chasing pitches go. But when CJ Abrams does find his pitch, and really for a lot of big league hitters, if you have the talent, you're going to do good things with it. His chase percentage was much lower in that first half as well. And now you see it as well with your other pillar of this organization, Keibert Ruiz, who we'll get into a little bit later on. But even deeper into those numbers right now, he has a 33% whiff rate on breaking pitches. If you're a big league starting player, which CJ Abrams is an all-star, that is his line. I expect him to be an all-star kind of player. That is an unacceptable rate to be whiffing on breaking pitches. It just is. And if you were to look deeper into it, he's crushing fastballs, but that's what you expect. You should be crushing a fastball. But also, he has a 20% whiff rate on fastballs compared to 16% just last year. That part right there is a little bit concerning. CJ Abrams just in one of the bigger slumps of his career here in DC. And that's just the matter of the fact here. CJ Abrams was never really an all-star caliber player before this season. But right now, he is chasing at a rate which is simply unacceptable. And that's the case here. If CJ Abrams were to correct these things, which, by the way, he could, he still has another month or so to really kind of turn this season around. But CJ Abrams was an all-star. But the numbers that he is putting up right now, since that all-star break, is unacceptable. And now he's batting 7th in your lineup, in which at first I was like, what are we doing? But now I kind of get it. This makes sense. He should not be your leadoff hitter at this point in time. Now, I do think he should be that down the road. I think he should be your opening day leadoff hitter come 2025. But sitting here today, things have been a big struggle bus, and it's because of that chase rate. He's going to have to cut down on it at some point. Good thing for us, he's 23 years old, and he's got some time to do that. But the Nationals, they did get the win yesterday. So let's give some kudos here. Patrick Corbin. Patrick Corbin last night, 5 2/3, 2 earned runs, 8 strikeouts, 3 walks, and 7 hits. I will take that line every single time. And also, here's the thing. We give Patrick Corbin all this crap. I do. You do. We all do it. We know why. He is starting to kind of, I'm not going to say turn his season around, but he is starting to put together some pretty decent starts. That is a good, warm feeling for me. This is someone who, again, you don't win the 2019 World Series without him. He's an icon in this franchise. And yes, you might be saying, what are you talking about? But no, he is. He is. It is good to see Patrick Corbin going out there every 5 days still, never hurt, never complains, a team leader in the clubhouse. It seems as if he could be finishing his Nats career relatively on the right track here. We all know it was a wildly disappointing contract back when what they gave him in 2019. But again, I say this every single time. Sign me up for that contract again, because we don't win the 2019 World Series without Patrick Corbin in that rotation. You simply do not. And what he did in Game 7 of the World Series should never be forgotten. So it is so just warm. It feels good to see Patrick Corbin going out there and doing what we've seen him do back in 2019. So good for Patrick Corbin. He deserves some good stuff here and there. And thank you all for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcast. And of course, now let's get into it with Keibert Ruiz, our guy, our catcher of the future, who is locked up until 2032. Keibert Ruiz. It's a tale of two different stories. CJ Abrams was a baller in the first half. Keibert Ruiz was not. CJ Abrams in the second half has fallen off. Keibert Ruiz has been pretty damn good so far, at least a lot better than what we saw in the first half. But even then, I like what I see from him. So let's get into it, as Keibert Ruiz has started to put together a relatively decent season here in the second half. But before we get into it, today's episode is brought to you by our very good friends over at eBay Motors. And of course, there is passion, drive, and patience, which is the formula for winning championships. And it is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the price you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep a ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Thank you all for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcast. A little bit later on, let's talk about Game 2 of this Nationals Marlins series, as we will get into that preview a little bit later on. And also, we've got an update on Cade Cavalli we'll be getting to here shortly. But before that, Keibert Ruiz has kind of turned his season around just a little bit. Now, if you were to look at his numbers overall, they're not all that impressive. But one thing about Keibert Ruiz that I think really has kind of been the killer of his day and the killer of his game here in 2024 is consistency. And Davey Martinez got into that last night. You saw Keibert Ruiz end up yesterday's game with 3 hits, which is what we needed. And Spencer Nussbaum had a very interesting story about him. And Davey Martinez talked about it a lot in yesterday's post-game presser. But I think we all know that consistency is the biggest thing with Keibert Ruiz. And consistency has actually been on display in the second half of the season for your franchise catcher. As again, Spencer Nussbaum, he wrote a nice little piece on it in the Washington Post. And Davey also had some nice things to say about Keibert Ruiz, who is going to be here until 2032, whether we like it or not. I think one thing that we may sleep on is that Keibert Ruiz is still a puppy in baseball terms, whether we want to admit it or not. I think I'm not going to throw you in there, but I think I have probably been a little bit tougher on him. And I think it goes back to looking at prospect rankings, seeing the potential, seeing what he could be, and talking about what he could be. Whether we want to admit it or not, we've seen guys turn it around here, especially here in DC. Luis Garcia, last year, right before the trade deadline, or really right after the trade deadline, was sent down to AAA And we were talking about him being potentially DFA'd in spring training, or at least I was. It can happen. You can turn your career around. And it really, Keibert Ruiz hasn't had a bad career, but he has had a very bad season overall. It can happen with him. He can turn things around. Now, the question is, when will he actually find that consistency? That is really the big part of this. And when I talk about consistency with Keibert Ruiz, it's not just offensively, but it's also defensively as well. We've talked about his frame and his framework. It's not that good. But also at the plate, a pretty common trend here, as we kind of got into in the first segment, it starts with chasing. His chase rate is very similar to CJ Abrams. And again, Davey Martinez talked about that yesterday in the post-game presser. We know he has the power, meaning we all do. You see it on display. You've seen it in yesterday's game. We had multiple balls that were crushed off the bat. We know he has the power, and plus, he's got one of the better bat-to-ball skills in Major League Baseball, and that's really an undoubted fact when it comes to Keibert Ruiz. He can be an elite offensive catcher, but it hasn't clicked all at once at really any point in his career, at any point in his tenure as a Washington National. In my opinion, he has been the most inconsistent offensive piece to the Washington Nationals since dating back to the Michael A. Taylor days. If you remember the Michael A. Taylor days, some weeks he'd be crushing the baseball. You see it and you're like, this guy has Gold Glove caliber defense. If he can just hit for like a 740 OPS consistently, he would be a very good and big piece to that team just a handful of years ago. But that never happened. And at this point in time, it hasn't really happened with Keibert Ruiz either. But over the next month, he's going to be a pretty big focal point. And what I need to see from Keibert is some discipline at the plate. Cut down on the chase. End September strong. And that is going to be a huge kind of watch for myself and hopefully for yourself as well. Because he's not going anywhere. I want to see how he ends this year, and I think that will be a huge storyline going into the last 24 games or so. Because the matter of the fact here is, the Nationals, you've got Caleb Lomavita down in the minors. I don't know what he's going to be. I don't know how good he can be down the line. And you never draft for need. But the fact is here. It's right here in the pudding. They took a catcher pretty early on in this last year's draft. Just about a month and a half ago. Again, you don't draft for need. But Caleb Lomavita is a pretty solid prospect. And he could be a guy. You never draft for need. Again, I want to reiterate for that. You never draft for need. But I don't think it was a mistake of them taking a catcher in round 1A of comp picks. Pick number 39 overall, Caleb Lomavita. Someone who was linked to the Nationals even at number 10 overall at this last year's draft. We'll see how the Nationals do end this, but Keibert Ruiz, the spotlight is going to be on him, at least when it comes to the Locked On Nationals podcast. But now I do want to get into Cade Cavalli a little bit because we don't really talk about this all too much. We've kind of gotten into it with our friend Bobby Blanco a little bit, but I'm old enough to remember when Cade Cavalli was supposed to be pitching for your Nationals in mid-June, maybe even early June, late May, if things went right. Well, I don't think he's going to pitch at any point in the minors this year. He has made a few rehab starts, but then got shut down with dead arm. But yesterday, Davey Martinez was asked about it. He did throw a recent bullpen here. He is down at West Palm Beach. And Davey Martinez has shown some optimism with him that he could potentially make a few more rehab starts to end the year. But I don't think that's going to be the case whatsoever. If it was up to me at this point, just shut him down. Because one little slightly concerning piece to that bullpen was he topped out at 93. Now, again, with the arm issues coming off Tommy John, that's not uncommon. But someone who is throwing 99 to 100 pretty damn consistently, sitting up there at the top of the radar gun, seeing him top out at 93, it's noteworthy. I don't know what to expect with Cavalli down the line, but I thought that was interesting, to say the least. And I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what to think of it, but that's going to be something that we'll be talking about heading into this offseason. So make sure you tune in to Locked On Nationals, where it is your team every single day. But now let's get into it as the Nationals take on the Marlins tonight. Again, this pesky Marlins team, they have taken advantage of us in the past. But ultimately, you've got Mackenzie Gore on the bump. We'll see what the Nationals can do. But before we get into it, let me tell you guys about some of our very good friends over at PrizePicks. And of course, we've talked about PrizePicks many, many times here, but I want you to know that they are America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. And PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in, and you can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. And PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and of course, my state, Virginia. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. That's right. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. How good of a deal is that? I can tell you, I will be doing all of that with PrizePicks. All you have to do is download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Now, let me tell you guys about some of our other very good friends over at Game Time. And of course, we've talked about Game Time plenty of times and what I do before I go to a Nationals game. Well, Game Time is a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And I can tell you guys about some of the super deals that I have found. This last Saturday, I went to the Cubs-Nats game. I was walking up Half Street with my 3 other friends here in town. What did I do? I opened up Game Time. I found a Flash Zone deal, which you can find any given day, if going to the Nationals game or a concert, whatever it is. And also, I got the view image from my seat so I can see if there's any obstruction, see what the views are, and also show my friends because, hey, when we have Game Time, we can use that right then and just have a ball of a time over at a national game. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. All you'll have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. And again, if you haven't used Game Time before, download the Game Time app and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Now let's get into it with the Nationals taking on the Miami Marlins today, as the Nats have had a ton of success down in Miami as they are 8-0. 8-0 down in Miami. What a time to be alive against the Marlins. They have dominated them all season long. Now you've got Mackenzie Gore on the bump tonight. Again, one of the other focal points of the Nationals in 2024. Will Mackenzie Gore have some luck tonight against the Miami Marlins? Well, good for them, because the Nationals offense, when it comes to being down in Miami, they pop off. So one thing I will not be concerned about whatsoever is the fact of the matter is he's going to have run support. And the Nats are going to be going up against a relatively decent-ish pitcher that we have not seen up to this point in time. But Mackenzie Gore is going to be my real focal point here. And luckily for him, he hasn't really faced the Marlins all too much. You've seen guys like Jake Berger only have 2 at-bats against him. He's got 1 hit. And then, of course, Christian Pache, who has had 6 at-bats against Mackenzie Gore. They 500 OPS. I don't really know what we're going to be walking into here tonight, but one thing is for sure, I expect this Nationals offense to really kind of continue their breakout against the Miami Marlins. And boy, does it feel good to see that and really just hear about it, because the Nationals, again, they have struggled down in Miami for quite some time now, and we're starting to finally go fishing down in South Florida. So I think the Nationals stay hot tonight. And if you're with our friends over at FanDuel, place a little money on them to win on the run line. I've got a pretty good feeling with the Mackenzie Gore start tonight that he will dominate against those pesky Miami Marlins. So thank you all for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcast. And of course, you can catch me over on Twitter at RyanClary11, and as well as our show page at LO_Nationals. That is where you'll find us. Until then, I'll catch you on the flip side. Have a good one. Go Nats.